Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parkinson's Foundation's Wellness Wednesdays webinar. Thank you for joining us. We will begin shortly. Please know we are recording today's presentation, and you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to today's recording with additional resources in about 1 week. Today's webinar offers an introduction and a basic overview of Parkinson's disease. We'll explore its causes, common symptoms, available treatments, and effective strategies for managing them. We will learn practical daily living tips to empower you to take charge of your health and to navigate the challenges of living with PD. Before we get into it, I want to remind you about our other PD Health at Home virtual programs. Each week, we offer sessions tailored to support people with Parkinson's and their care partners, including Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, Fitness Fridays, care partner-specific programs, our expert briefings, and a Spanish language series, Y Salud en Casa. Be sure to visit our website to see what's coming up and explore our archived videos on YouTube. Our next Wellness Wednesday will highlight how movement is one of the most powerful ways to live well with Parkinson's, supporting not only strength and balance, but also mood, confidence, and brain health. We'll explore the science behind exercise as medicine and how it can do more than just manage symptoms. It can help shape the course of the disease. So we'll learn more about our upcoming virtual programs and register at parkinson.org/PD Health. PD Health at Home is presented by the Light of Day Foundation, whose generosity has made this programming possible. And now I'd like to introduce our expert presenter for today's Wellness Wednesday. Dr. Kumar Narayanan is the Juanita J. Bartlett Professor of Neurology and Vice Chair for Research at the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine and the Director of the Iowa Center for Neurodegeneration. Dr. Narayanan is a leading expert in the neural mechanisms of cognitive dysfunction in Parkinson's disease and related disorders. His work integrates clinical neurology, neuroscience, and neuromodulation and is supported by NIH and Department of Defense funding. He has authored more than 200 peer-reviewed publications and has received numerous honors for his research and teaching, including the American Academy of Neurology's John Stolk Award for Movement Disorders Research. Dr. Narayanan, thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. And I'm just going to take control of these slides. There we go. And welcome. So my name again is Kumar Narayanan. I'm from the University of Iowa, and it's really awesome to be here with you and for you to share an hour of your lives learning about Parkinson's disease. And I hope we have some fun together, and I hope you have questions. And you can put them in the chat or reach out, and I look forward to answering them. All right, so before I tell you about the basics, the point of this is to inspire hope in you and in our Parkinson's community, because there's a lot to learn about Parkinson's and a lot to do. And I hope that this is a brief orientation, and I hope it gives you a lot of ideas on ways to move forward. And you might have often had this scenario. This happens quite a bit. You go see your doctor. We do a bunch of tests. We spend some time with you, and we eventually come to this point. Doc, I have Parkinson's disease. And you might ask, what's next? And regardless of what I'm about to tell you, I think the next slide is the most important. This is a patient of mine, Dave. After the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, he went and saw whooping cranes on the Gulf Coast of the United States, Colorado's Garden of the Gods. He went cycling, Lake Dillon, Brickridge, Colorado. And this was not a physician-approved activity, but he went chasing alligators in Florida. This is very important because all of this happened after the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. So no matter where you are, if you have this disease, if you know a family member of this who has this disease, there is a lot of life to live. And if David spent his years with Parkinson's, Dave passed away in 2020, if he'd have spent his time with Parkinson's disease just worried about Parkinson's disease, Parkinson's disease, Parkinson's disease, he would have missed life. And I can tell you as a clinician, I've taken care of 1,000 patients. And I try to reinforce this over and over again. Parkinson's disease is annoying, frustrating, devastating. It defines a lot about your life, but it does not define you. And there's still a lot of wonderful things to do. And it's important to have that perspective as you go through your journey with Parkinson's disease. So, people often ask me, Doc, how much time have I got left? And I tell them that is the wrong question. The right question is, how are you going to make today, including this webinar, awesome? So think about that when you think about your Parkinson's disease. All right. That was not a learning objective, but here are some things that I hope you learned from today. In addition to that, learn what causes Parkinson's disease and who gets it. Understand the common symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Understand treatment options, including exercise, which we'll talk about in a second. Learn about the importance of multidisciplinary care, not just neurologists. I'm an academic subspecialty trained neurologist. Sure, I play a role, but I'm only part of the team. There's a much bigger team. And then learn about the Parkinson's resources and support that's out there. All right, let's take what causes Parkinson's disease? So I apologize. I'm a scientist. I'm a doctor. And so I am animated by data. Data is stuff that happens in the world and our ability to quantify it. And I also apologize because I have to show you graphs because that's the only way we talk about data. But we'll go slow and it'll be easy. Okay, so on the y-axis, which is the vertical, is how many people get Parkinson's disease. And the numbers are something like 1%. So 1% of people a certain number get Parkinson's disease. And on the x-axis, that horizontal, is age. So as you can see, if you're 10 years old, I have no 10-year-olds with Parkinson's disease. The percentage is 0. 20 years old, there's nobody with Parkinson's disease. I have had my youngest patient who's 23. So sometimes they come to us in academic subspecialty clinics, but it's very rare. 30 years old, not much Parkinson's disease. But by the age of 40, you can see the risk goes up, and 50 goes up higher, 60, 70, 80. And you might say, hey, listen, doc, it goes down at 90 and 100. I'll say exactly, because at age 90 and 100, people are starting to die of other things. So this is a deep insight into Parkinson's disease, because if you're having this discussion, the most common answer is, why do I have Parkinson's disease? It's because you have made it through a certain portion of your life. You've gained a certain amount of wisdom. Very important. Age is the biggest risk factor for Parkinson's disease. And, you might have heard, oh, there wasn't Parkinson's back in 1817 London when James Parkinson described it. There wasn't Parkinson's for most of human history. And that's true. It's because the life expectancy of human beings was between 40 and 50 until, recently, until the last couple hundred years. And as we've discovered antibiotics, as we've discovered, public health, sanitation, as we've got blood pressure, therapies for your heart, therapies for cancer, people all over the world are living longer, and they're getting Parkinson's more frequently. Another thing that's interesting is you'll notice it's in colors here, red and blue. Men get Parkinson's a little bit more frequently. Some studies as much as twice as frequently. That's important, and I'm going to tell you flat out, we don't know why. I got some theories, but I don't have any evidence why men get Parkinson's more frequently. But because of what I just told you, people are living longer, and Parkinson's is the biggest risk factor of age. This graph, you might describe it as an exponential or logarithmic curve, but I'm going to describe it much more simply for you. I'm going to call it a tidal wave. This is going to be a huge problem for our society because people are living longer all over the world. As people live longer, they're going to have more Parkinson's disease. And our healthcare system, our doctors, our physical therapists, our social workers, our yoga teachers, our stadiums, they're not equipped for this. So we're going to have to think about our society differently as Parkinson's becomes more common. It is one of the fastest growing neurological diseases and the second most common neurodegenerative disease. And I'll go back to this boat. There's in this, can I go backwards? Yeah. In this boat here, there's me, there's the Parkinson's Foundation, and I hope you'll join us in trying to figure out ways through this uncertain seas. Another thing that is a risk factor, and this is what we talk about often in my clinic visits, is, doc, is it something I did? Is it something I was exposed to? So this is another way of presenting data. This is a map of the United States. And the purple colors are areas with increased Parkinson's risk, and the green areas are areas with decreased Parkinson's risk. So you might notice a couple things here. You're like, wait a minute, there's a lot of purple here through, the Ohio River Valley and through West Virginia. There's a lot of purple here in Louisiana and Texas. And we have some data. If you look at zip code level data, there are some increased risk factors. So if you live close to, well-known things like a manganese plant, you might have an increased risk of Parkinson's disease. These areas, especially in Louisiana, are downstream of the incredible kind of pesticide burden from the Mississippi River, and there's specific exposures from refineries. You have an increased risk of Parkinson's disease. So we are parsing these things out, but there are some things that we know cause Parkinson's disease. There are some pesticides, rotenone, paraquat. I told you about manganese. These are specific risk factors of things that cause Parkinson's disease. And again, in a modern environment where we have these things more frequently, there may be some truth to that. If you were a military veteran, you went to Camp Lejeune in 1960, 1970, you would have double the risk of Parkinson's because something in the water at Camp Lejeune. And then, there's stuff that we did. This is a minor thing, but maybe you guys aren't savvy with boxing. This is Muhammad Ali, the best boxer that ever lived. We can argue about that later in the question period. But he did something. He took shots to his head, and that can be a risk factor for Parkinson's disease. So, that is certainly an exposure that's not necessarily geographic. And then another thing you might have heard is genes. So something about our genes. So this is a complicated graph. I apologize, but it has the same form. The y-axis is your chance of getting Parkinson's disease, and this is fold. So if you have this gene, you have double the chance. One is, you have no greater chance than baseline. 2 means you have double the chance. And in a family, there's the gene for synuclein, which we'll get back to in a second. And if you have a triplication for synuclein, you have, a way greater chance of getting Parkinson's, double. Now, if you think back to that original graph I showed you, this is taking your chance from 1% to 2%. So it's not deterministic in the way we think about genes. It's not like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's disease. If you have those genes, you will get those diseases at some point, but it modifies your risk. And through lots of work, we've identified common genes that we think modify that risk. Synuclein, LRRK2, Gaucher's disease, PINK1, PARK7. Each of these, they're all their own story, all very complex, but they increase your risk of having Parkinson's disease, but they're not always 100% penetrant. But even all of the genes only lead to about a 5 to 9% risk. In most patients, and we're starting to sequence more and more patients, we can only identify genetic risk factors in about 9% in the best study. So Parkinson's disease, if we look, I'm going to show you, this is a picture of the brain, a little gross, right? It's a gross anatomy, we call it. And it's a picture of part of the brain called the midbrain. And you might notice a pattern, okay? So this is the two. Now, first thing you might notice is these are two different brains, and every brain is different. And if you look at your brain with an MRI, as your neurologist should, they'll show you all the differences. But there's a part here in the brain that's black. And neuroanatomists, of course, they don't speak English, they speak Latin, and they called it nigra, substantia nigra, which means black stuff. It's because dopamine neurons, like my skin, have melanin in them. Melanin is black in the brain. In brains of patients with Parkinson's disease, as was noticed in the 50s, there is not as much pigment, not as much melanin, not as much dopamine. So these neurons that contain the neurotransmitter dopamine die. And in about 15 years ago, somebody in Japan was able to develop a technology to fill each one of these dopamine neurons and fill it with a dye and trace it. And the details, again, this is data, but the details of this are not important. What's important here is this scale bar, okay? 5 millimeters. 5 millimeters. A neuron is about, a tenth of a millimeter across at its best. But it sends dopamine over millimeters. That's a huge feat of cell biology. I'm going to use a metaphor. I'm in Iowa. Okay, I won't use Iowa because you won't know the city maybe, but say you have a FedEx office in Chicago. We all know FedEx, right? And you want to ship packages all over the United States. It's a little bit like that. So it requires a lot of energy. And then what if I told you that, however old you are, your dopamine neurons are 6 months older than that. So your brain is full of neurons that have lived as long as you have and a little bit longer, and they have this huge medical, so they're uniquely vulnerable. It's amazing that they survive at all, but they're uniquely vulnerable to age. These are some of the neurons that are the most vulnerable to age, which is why aging is the biggest risk factor. So if you look at these dopamine neurons under the microscope, as neurologists do, maybe this looks like a pink smear to you, but I'll point something out here. So if you see in the middle of your screen, there's a kind of circle. Let's see if I can get a laser pointer here. Maybe that's too complicated. So in the middle of your screen, there's you can see a little pink ball. So that is a Lewy body. And you might have heard of a decision called a disease called, thank you for showing with the mouse, Lewy body dementia. So in that disease, you see Lewy bodies, these things everywhere. And in Parkinson's disease, you see these things in the dopamine neurons. And we think that's why they die, although we're not sure. We know we see them, and we know the dopamine neurons die, but we're not exactly sure. So a little bit about alpha-synuclein. So alpha-synuclein is a protein first discovered in the electric fish, 1986. And these electric fish were full of this protein, alpha-synuclein. No one knew what it did. And about 10 years later, someone noticed that those Lewy bodies were full of alpha-synuclein. And alpha-synuclein is a funny molecule because it likes to form into patterns, a little bit like rebar. I don't know if you've been to the hardware store. If you look at whatever building you're in, like rebar is like a steel rod, and it's in your buildings and it's in order. But in the hardware store, it tends to clump up. And it tends to be like, you try to reach for your rebar and you can't grab just one, you grab a bunch. So synuclein tends to clump up. And we think, and I'm going to tell you, we're not sure, but we think it tends to clump up industrially in these neurons, leading to Lewy bodies. And Lewy bodies are not all synuclein, they're also full of garbage tags. So there's this protein called ubiquitin, which indicates garbage. So we know that there's a bunch of synuclein and a bunch of garbage tags, and that's the component of Lewy bodies. We think they're not great for neurons, but again, we're not sure. We just know that we see Lewy bodies in Parkinson's disease, and they contain about 80% alpha-synuclein. Now, you might think, oh my God, why don't we know what Parkinson's disease is? I have AI, I have Facebook, I have social media, I have electric cars. But this is complicated. I just told you we discovered synuclein in 1986. We discovered that dopamine caused Parkinson's in 1950. We discovered that synuclein was involved in Parkinson's disease in 1998. So, it's not that long. And it's your brain's pretty complicated. It is the most complicated object in the known universe between yours, each of us. So, give us some grace to figure this out. All right, to review, if you tuned out, if you hate my graphs and you fell asleep, you can wake up for this. Major risk factors for Parkinson's: age. Age. Men, double the risk. Exposures, maybe somewhat less than double the risk. Genes, minority of Parkinson's disease, but it's still very important and one of the ways we can understand it. This is what causes Parkinson's disease. But less important than that is this. It's not your fault. Literally, none of that is anything you had any control over. So there is no case for a Parkinson's patient to sit around feeling guilty. There's like nothing you could have done differently. Even if you'd have gone back to when you're 10 years old and say, I'm going to live differently, very little would you have done. Could you have changed? You can't change your genes. You can't change your age. Well, probably don't want to. Maybe you could have changed your exposures, but that's not the driving risk. And, so you have to, you have to remember that. I often ask people, okay, I'm, typical Parkinson's patient, mid-60s, you have Parkinson's disease. Would you want to go back 10 years? Everyone says yes, but that we have a process of aging, and this is part of that process. I don't think it's important to recognize, in individual patients, what causes Parkinson's. For me, it's super relevant because if I can understand what causes Parkinson's, we might be able to prevent it. But for individual patients, once you have Parkinson's disease, that's not the question. The question is this: how do we move forward? How do you make each day awesome? That's the question. Okay. Understand common symptoms of Parkinson's. So I want to give you a picture. You probably have your view of it. I'll give you my view of it. Okay. So about 1869, a very famous neurologist, his name was Gower, Gowers. He drew Parkinson's. And I love this picture because it captures a lot of the symptoms. This patient he's got a tremor, right? You can't see the tremor because it's a picture. He's bent over. That's called camptocormia. He looks rigid, and he looks like he's moving slowly. And he's a man because he's most frequently male. It's a male predominant disease. So it captures many of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And if you're me, I see Parkinson's everywhere, in the grocery store, in the coffee shop, and I recognize it's a very clear clinical pattern to it. But Gowers and most neurologists, for most of the specialty's history, were not famous at talking to patients. But the more we talk to our Parkinson's patients, the more symptoms we found. We found that there's ankle churning. This is a more expansive version of Gowers's initial come up. Mike Oken really kind of pioneered this, although others were involved. There can be on time, off time. There can be dystonias. It can affect your gait. But really, the message here is it can affect people's movements profoundly. And this is the so-called cardinal symptoms, not, cardinal as in important. So tremor is a fixed oscillation around a point, shaking. One version of Parkinson's, the James Parkinson's called the shaking palsy. Bradykinesia, I'll unpack that. Brady means slow, kinesia means movement. So slow movements. And actually, that's the most important part of Parkinson's, because if you have to have slow movements to have Parkinson's disease. Rigidity, which is stiffness. And then posture instability, which you saw in the previous slide. There was a walker involved. Patients can fall. And then, as I said, in the last really 10 or 20 years, and again, this is a huge revolution in Parkinson's disease, neurologists started to figure out that there are all kinds of other things that go on with Parkinson's disease. There's a lack of smell, changes in sleep. There's cognitive symptoms, my area of expertise. There's mood symptoms, anxiety, depression, constipation, bladder dysfunction, excess salivation, which means extra saliva, orthostatic hypotension, which means your blood pressure drops when you stand up. And I really think, I'm a neurologist trained in the brain, but I think of Parkinson's disease as a systemic illness. The longer I care for patients, the more meds I prescribe, and usually towards the end of patients' lives, I'm prescribing all of their medications because I get persnickety about which medications patients should and shouldn't be on. And these problems are not uncommon. I mean, lack of smells, like 60, 70% of patients, depending on the study, sleep disturbances is 80%, and if you look hard enough, you're going to find it. Cognitive dysfunction is 80% some point in the disease. Depression, anxiety, psychosis, 60% of patients. Constipation is ubiquitous. Orthostatic, these things are common, and they're very common aspects of Parkinson's disease, and often neurologists don't spend enough time on them. And frequently, they are the most important parts of the disease. So I don't think of Parkinson's as a brain disease. I think of it as a systemic disease, something that touches almost every organ system. So, this again is a little controversial, but usually we tell people that, they get some symptoms before you get diagnosed. Usually it's REM sleep disorder and the lack of smell that come first, but there may be some other symptoms. And then the motor symptoms start at some point in the disease. And when the motor symptoms start, you get bradykinesia, slow movements, rigidity, tremor. You get early stage, and then the stages are basically all based on the motor symptoms. The non-motor systems don't have a role in it. And then, you have mild cognitive impairment, psychotic symptoms, dementia. Those are later symptoms. However, I want to say that I've seen many of these things early in the disease. My first patient I cared for, 42 years old, I was a medical student. She had Parkinson's disease, and her first complaint was hallucinations. 30% of patients with Parkinson's disease have some cognitive impairment at the initial diagnosis. And sometimes we have I would argue that, if you think Parkinson's and dementia with Lewy bodies are kind of the same disease or similar diseases, dementia with Lewy bodies, the patients start with the cognitive symptoms and end up with the motor symptoms. So there's a lot of debate in my mind about the order here. But I will say that the longer patients have the disease, the more often they get more of the symptoms. So you can get more symptoms with time. And that's more likely. But it's not saying that you will, and each patient, I have to say, walks their own course. And that's very important. This is not a prophecy. I'm not a psychic. I can't tell you what you will have, but some patients, they get bradykinesia, tremor, urinary symptoms, and that's all. Other patients, they get daytime sleepiness, some rigidity, and then they get dementia. So it's a very unique path, just like life. Okay, so main point, a review, in case you fell asleep again and wanted to wake back up. Parkinson's affects movements, but it also affects other things like thinking, mood, and sleep. So, I would almost say that if you have a new symptom, it's likely that Parkinson's is the cause, or Parkinson's made it worse. Now, I do say that, Parkinson's isn't the only thing. I frequently have patients who have Parkinson's disease and then they get cancer. Or I had a patient with Parkinson's disease, and he was in the passenger seat driving towards Chicago from Iowa and got hit by a car, and then he had severe pain, and Parkinson's did not help. So Parkinson's can make things worse, and it can contribute. But it's reasonable to think if you have a new weird symptom, Parkinson's probably has something to add to this. Okay, treatment options. Very important, okay, because we can help. And now I mean me, I mean the Parkinson's Foundation, I mean your doctor, we can help. And it's very important to think about that. All right, so let me start with the basics. A lot of people accuse medical doctors as we're pill pushers. We do prescribe a lot of pills, but I often start with the stuff that doesn't involve any pills. And I often hear patients say, "Oh man, I'm just going to get worse." And I tell them, listen, your brain can learn. You are learning right now, I hope. Unless you were asleep, maybe you learned 3 new things from my review slides in the last, 29 minutes, right? So your brain has the capability to learn. Our brains are plastic. Even my Parkinson's patient with dementia, their brain is the most adaptive, the fastest learning thing in the known universe, except for the other humans, right? Our brains, this is what our brains do. And you can learn to walk again. You can learn to talk again. You can learn to use devices. All of you, in the last 10 years, you got a smartphone. Here's my phone, right? And And you've learned to use this phone in new ways, right? You can do all kinds of fancy things. When, social media wasn't here 10 or 15 years ago, you learned to use social media. So you guys are learning all the time. And we're going to take that brain's ability to learn and we're going to deliver, these are therapists who are specialists in helping your brain learn. Doesn't involve any medications, has almost no side effects, and is good. And it can be transformative. Often the biggest thing I do for my patients is refer them to our physical therapists. We're lucky we have world-class physical therapy here at the University of Iowa, but you likely have them in your community, and there are groups that train physical therapists and occupational therapists in Parkinson's. So therapy is a huge part, and it's often the first step. So physical therapy, occupational therapy, which is how to use things and interact with the world, speech therapy. Often, you can do things like sing or yell and you can be understood. And cognitive behavioral therapy. When you get Parkinson's disease, it's a big change. And so talking to someone about how you can cope and adapt to that change, very important. So there's lots of we got music therapy, art therapy. I would do it all because remember, it's going to make each day awesome. All right. Another thing I can do that often has nothing to do with medications, but it's often the second thing I do after therapy is focus on sleep. You can make your sleep better. About 80% of my patients fall asleep in the recliner in front of the news. And if you imagine that situation, right, a recliner is not restful sleep. And you can imagine on the news all the horrible things that are happening on the news, and it's like getting into their dreams. And then they're already set up to have poor sleep. So, you could set a schedule, limit naps. I usually say 25 minutes or less. Get a bright light or look at the sun between 8 and 9 in the morning. Exercise. No, neurologist will not let you drink caffeine after 1 p.m. Relax, get the temperature right. And then I often prescribe melatonin. I prefer the gummy version, 3 milligrams. Has almost no side effects. And it can help normalize those sleep rhythms. Now, I can do a lot more invasive things, but this is how I start. But I would be obsessive about sleep because of this. I don't have any evidence on this, but I think that this protein, alpha-synuclein, is cleared from your brain at night. So if that's the case, you want to get your sleep as good as possible. And there are lots of things your doctors can do to help with that. So I would be absolutely obsessive about trying to make your sleep the best you can. Now, it's not worth worrying about, but there are ways I'll bet you can make your sleep better. Get your phone out of your bedroom, get magnetic light tight curtains, those kinds of things. Okay, so now the workhorse, medications. So it's hard for me to connote to you how much of a home run some of these medications were. Parkinson's in the 60s, 50s was very difficult to treat and very challenging. But then, as I said, people discovered, hey, you're missing dopamine neurons. Let's give the brain levodopa, or levodopa is a form of dopamine. Levodopa is a dopamine precursor, replenishes the dopamine, and it is the gold standard. We give a lot of levodopa because it works really well, has not as many side effects, and works for the most patients. And the state of the art these days is to coat the levodopa in all kinds of ways, or we even have a pump. There's a couple versions of this pump that can give levodopa directly to the bloodstream. But oral levodopa, usually 3, 4 times a day, maybe longer. I have patients on it 6, 7 times a day, 9, 10 times a day, can make a huge difference. And the question I get is frequently, well, what are the side effects? And I say, well, usually, there's not many. There's some fatigue, restlessness, and later on there can be side effects, but that's not to worry because you want to make today awesome. If levodopa decreases your risk of falls, helps you breathe a little bit better, and if your chest wall muscles are moving, you might get pneumonia less. It's going to make you live longer, and it's going to let you do the things you want to do, specifically walk, interact, and talk to people. So I am I'm biased towards giving levodopa early. Now, we have other drugs that we can give. There are the dopamine agonists, ropinirole, pramipexole, rotogone. I sometimes use these adjunctively. They work for restless leg syndrome. I tend to feel like they have more side effects than levodopa, specifically all kinds of hallucinations, the swelling of the feet, compulsive gambling. So they're not my favorite medications, not the easiest to use, but they can use in specific indications like restless leg syndrome. Sometimes they can be the right drug, although I prefer other drugs first line for that. Then there are the MAO-B inhibitors, and there's some weak, ultra weak evidence that it slows the disease down, rasagiline. So sometimes I'll use them in that situation. Then there's catechol-O-methyltransferase inhibitors, specifically entacapone, and they can sometimes make levodopa work better. I tend not to use them because they they can be hard to use and hard to keep stable. Then there's anticholinergic medications, and these can help you think more clearly. And I use these heavily because patients come to me with cognitive symptoms. Another thing that's important that your doctor can do is they can look at your med list. And I should have put this, but I'm going to say this now. Often the medical system puts my Parkinson's patients on drugs they should not be on. So I'll give you a list because you should get off these drugs as fast as you can if you're on them. First, alcohol. I saw a patient yesterday who had a Manhattan with 3 shots and a glass of wine every day for 50 years. You can imagine that that's not good for anybody, but for a Parkinson's patient, boy, is it really bad because it's going to increase their fall risks, make them think worse. So, you probably should limit your use of alcohol quite a bit. I'm not saying that you don't have a drink with friends, but daily alcohol is good for nobody, and it's not good for my Parkinson's patients. Benadryl. So, if you wanted to sleep, you think, maybe I'll take some Waldrill, or you look at it. If there is a antihistamine in your sleep drugs, or if you're taking it for allergies, often those drugs can make Parkinson's worse because Parkinson's patients are missing acetylcholine as much as they're missing dopamine. So you have to be careful about anticholinergic drugs. And sometimes they can sneak up on you. There's a drug called oxybutynin, which is typically taken for bladder problems. And that drug can make Parkinson's worse, make your thinking worse. And then there's the worst drug, opioids. And this is a fault of the medical system because drug companies pushed us to prescribe lots of opioids and for 30 years. And there's almost no reason to take opioids. None. Yes, if you had surgery, there's a use for 3 weeks. But if you're on opioids for longer than 3 weeks, you need a pain clinic consult and a careful review. And the doctor who prescribes it needs a strong talking to because there's no indication, that should not have a pain clinic involved because these drugs can make you sleepy, they can make you constipated, and they can make all of your Parkinson's symptoms worse. And I kid you not, by taking patients off opiates, I have cured many symptoms of Parkinson's disease and dementia. And then even worse, benzodiazepines. So the benzodiazepines, Xanax, Ativan, lorazepam, Valium, they bind to the same receptors that alcohol binds to. And there is some use for benzodiazepines, specifically clonazepam at sleep, but most benzodiazepines are massively overprescribed, and they're given for anxiety. Awful drugs, and they often make my Parkinson's patients much worse. And again, we cure people in our clinic by taking people off drugs. And there's metoclopramide, Reglan, so in Abilify, aripiprazole. So antipsychotics. Those antipsychotics block dopamine. And I told you the Parkinson's patients don't have much dopamine to begin with. And I, all too frequently, take patients off these drugs and cure Parkinson's. But really what I've done is just decrease their dopamine. So medications need a careful review. And it seems complicated, but it's very simple. Your workhorse drug, levodopa, and I use anticholinergic medications, and I take you off medications that make things worse. So those are the keys. And then, so we have medications for every symptom. If you have a new symptom, likely Parkinson's, as I said, but we have medications that are highly effective for depression, highly effective for anxiety. We have medications that are sort of effective for motor fluctuations. And typically I have patients who say, I don't want to take levodopa because I don't want to get dyskinetic. And I tell them, listen, you may not get dyskinetic. And if you get dyskinetic, we got a lot of things to do for you. So take levodopa, live, make today awesome, go skydiving, don't chase an alligator, and we'll figure out the dyskinesia when they come. But we have several drugs for the dyskinesia, and we have many strategies to deal with dyskinesia. We have drugs for constipation, specifically Miralax, which works really well. We have drugs for cognitive function. And we have medications for sleep and acting out dreams. So if you have a symptom, talk about it with your primary care doctor and your neurologist. There might be something we can do. Most likely, there's something we can do. All right, finally, and we do this so we do everything from, therapy and life coaching, which, I'm doing a little bit right now, to deep brain stimulation, which is very exciting. I just want to show you a little bit of how it works. And Krista, I think you'll need to click the slide on your right. I can't click it. No, other one. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so this is a patient who has Parkinson's disease. You can see he's got the tremor. You can look at his blink frequency. He doesn't blink as frequently. His movements are rigid. He's stiff. This is from YouTube. If you Google this guy, he's a delightful Kiwi accent, but his voice is soft. Okay, Krista, you can click the next one. So I won't advertise any company, but this patient now, he turned his deep brain stimulation on, and you can see there's a dramatic change in the statistics of movement. His blinks are faster. He's moving better. He's not as rigid. His tremor is gone. His voice is louder. So, looks like magic, right? It's amazing in the right patient. And here at the University of Iowa, we are very thoughtful about who we do deep brain stimulation with. He's about to turn his deep brain stimulation off. We have a process where we meet you, we make sure you have Parkinson's disease, we do a bunch of neuroimaging, we look at your levodopa off, we look at your Parkinson's disease off levodopa, on levodopa, and then we do neuropsychological testing. So you want to go to a place that does a lot of these and is used to doing deep brain stimulation to get the best outcome. It works really well about 70 to 80% of the time. It's invasive, it's neurosurgery, but it can work. All right, last thing, most important thing, a treatment that's, well, not the most important thing, a treatment that's free, slows the disease down, and has no side effects. I got this treatment, actually. Is anyone interested out there? I'll bet you are. Here it is. Ready? Exercise. Exercise is almost free, maybe, $200 for an exercise bicycle. I prefer stationary exercise bicycle indoors, because here in Iowa, the weather does not always cooperate. But we also do strength training, balance, agility, multitasking, flexibility, yoga. Parkinson's Foundation is very up into this because they have movement seminars. They have all kinds of ways that you can be well. So it can be very helpful. And I have to say, I participate in a lot of Parkinson's trials. And the most exciting Parkinson's trial is SPARKS 3, which is a trial of exercise in Parkinson's disease. We think, my best guess is the evidence suggests it slows the disease down by about 15%. Which is amazing. If we had a drug that did that, we would be on the front page of every newspaper. So, exercise. And I want to tell you that we are studying a whole bunch of other drugs. I'm involved in some of these, I'm involved in some of these drugs, but we are studying many of these drugs to slow Parkinson's down. So stick with us. But we're working on it. There's stuff that's coming out there. All right, things that don't work. Stem cells. We've studied it. There's no evidence that stem cells work. If you Google it, there's a stem cell clinic that's trying to separate you from your money, and they're highly unethical. Should be shut down. Marijuana doesn't work. There's no evidence that it works. Anything you read on social media. If you read about something in social media and you didn't hear about it in your doctor's office, your alarm bell should go off. Because think about the other things you read about on social media, and did they end up being true? I'm not saying don't have a conversation with your doctor about something that you read on social media, but if the only place you've heard about something is on social media, it's not going to work. Supplements. We've tried all kinds of supplements. We've done industrial, phase 3, double-blind evidence trials of coenzyme Q, of all kinds of supplements. There's not a supplement that we found that has worked for Parkinson's disease. Anyone who's selling you a supplement at this stage is just trying to separate you from your money, and they're preying on you because you're vulnerable. Something you heard from a friend. Okay to have a discussion with your doctor, but usually if you've heard something, think about the other things you've heard. Rumors, right? These are at the stage of rumors. We as physicians, we're committed to give you stuff with evidence, stuff with the clinical trial, because medicine can do a lot of harm, I just yesterday saw a patient who took some THC gummies because they thought it would help his Parkinson's. He was in the hospital for a month with hallucinations and falls. So, there's reasons we do evidence-based medicine. And if we give you something, you can expect we can tell you precisely what the risks and benefits are. Stuff you do on your own, I can't help you with that. But I wouldn't think that anything that has a clinical trial doesn't have evidence with it. I wouldn't try. So the review, there are lots of things that help: therapy, sleep, medicines for motor symptoms, non-motor symptoms, surgery, and exercise. Most important thing, we can manage many symptoms for many years. There's lots we can do. And I've never said to a patient, there's nothing more I can do. Literally never said it in 12 years. So we will always be working with you. All right, I'm going to fly quickly to the rest of the stuff because I think you probably have questions. So another thing that's important about Parkinson's disease is multidisciplinary care. And the reason is Parkinson's is really complex. And this is all I do all day, every day. And I'm telling you, it's complicated. I don't understand every aspect of it, and neither does anyone else. So even if you come to see me, wait 9 months, you'll have 45 minutes with me. I can't learn about your life in 45 minutes. Whereas therapists and other providers, psychiatrists spend 90 minutes with you. Therapists will see you 1 hour, 3 times a week. And if we communicate, we're going to save everybody money. We're going to save you time, and we're going to get better care to you. There's data on this from ALS. So ALS is another motor neuron disease, very devastating disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease. Data that multidisciplinary care saves money and improves quality of life. So we have instituted this in most Parkinson's Foundation centers of excellence across the country. Multidisciplinary care is part of what we do. It involves a broad team, everything from neurologist, speech language therapist, caregiver, nurses, neurosurgeons, sex therapists, urologists, dietitians. We're all working together, kind of pulling together for your care. And this is our clinic here at the University of Iowa. There's me, PT, OT, a pharmacist, medical assistant, geriatric psychiatry, social work, neuropsychology, and nursing, because they take most of the calls. We have such valuable information and valuable discussions. So something that we do, and something that's done basically at every Parkinson's Foundation Center of Excellence. So something you can expect, and something that you should expect for your care. So multidisciplinary clinic care is better. All right, so some resources. Again, equally important, you are not alone. You have lots of people pulling for you. So there's the Parkinson's Foundation, parkinson.org. There's a helpline. Write this number down: 1-800-4PD-INFO. There's a helpline at parkinsons.org. And they are on social media. So if you're bashing social media, you can reach out to these folks on social media. I bet they'll send you carrier pigeons if you request them. So they have information packets, experts, seminars, lots of ways that we reaching out to you. We have a very detailed website with lots of information. And the doctor's just the tip of this iceberg. You have your community. You have other patients. You have the Parkinson's Foundation. You have other Parkinson's Foundation organizations, the American Parkinson's Disease Association, the Michael J. Fox. You are not alone. We are all pulling for you and fighting for you. And then, so more hope, and even more quickly. So the National Institute of Health has a whole focus on Parkinson's disease. It's one of their areas of core interest, but we need more. And so I'm going to ask each of you out there in Zoom land to call your congressperson. Tell them Parkinson's disease is important. Call your senator. So Parkinson's research is important. Tell them to fund Parkinson's research. And you might think, what does the federal government do? The federal government can take humans to the moon. The federal government can solve multiple sclerosis, can solve stroke, can solve lots of forms of cancer, can deal with smoking, can build highways. If we in America, and even if you're international, if we in the world work together, there's nothing we can't do. So fund Parkinson's research, fund dementia research. We are close. And I can tell you, I'm living this in the last year. We have people ready to go. We have insights ready to go that we cannot do because the funds are delayed. We've even been awarded the funds. They're just administratively delayed. All right, so here we are in Iowa, center of the country. And notice there's no cornfields. Here's the University of Iowa. I'll fly through this quickly. We're a Parkinson's Foundation of Excellence, and we also have a VA. We all kind of work together. Here's our Center of Excellence. We have many providers all working together. And then here's my lab. We focus on early diagnosis mechanisms and neuroprotection. Here's everyone who works here. So we have a large group of people, and this is important. In that not being alone, people everywhere. We're not the only people at the University of Iowa, but people everywhere, all over this country, are working hard to cure this disease. My lab, these people here, I can say this because I know them, they're working 100 hours a week. Literally, it is hard. as they physically can. They're here nights, they're here weekends. They're pulling all-nighters, trying to come up with new therapies for people like you. And our lab is not unique. They're motivated. I mean, these people paid peanuts. It's not about the money. It's not about the fame. You'll never hear their names. It's they're motivated to help you. They've met patients in my clinic and they're like, they come back and they're like, wow, I could discover something that helps somebody. And that's what motivates them. And they're not going to give up. We'll find ways forward no matter what the challenges are. But there are people like this in every institution in this country and even in companies. And we're pulling for you. Thank you very much. I went a little bit long. Sorry, I'm a windbag, but I'll just have some time for questions.
It's really refreshing, Dr. Narayanan, to feel your inspiration for our community. I can't say that I've had a presenter exude so much passion and joy externally in the work that they do. So thank you for choosing to dedicate your career in Parkinson's. I have a question from one of our viewers named Farida. They're wondering how she could help encourage a person with Parkinson's to participate in exercise or social activities. She says it seems he doesn't want to do anything.
So, Parkinson's has many symptoms. One of them is apathy. So, Parkinson's patients can have a lack of motivation. And not everything is treatable, but it may be movable. So if we could get this person to a psychiatrist, get them a cognitive behavioral therapist, often tele, you could identify the barriers and they might say, I don't want to go to exercise for these three reasons. And they might be trivial reasons like, I don't like the way it looks. I don't like it to sweat. I can't get to the gym. So, often I work hard with our therapy team to identify those barriers and we do crazy things. People hate me, interior designers. I say, take an exercise bicycle, get it from Amazon, make sure it's cheap, put it in your living room, replace the couch. And after you use the exercise bicycle for 21 days, then you could move it. But you got to use it for 21 days. So that's a cognitive behavioral therapy strategy, can be highly effective. So I would say for Farida, the next thing to do is to engage a psychiatrist and a cognitive behavioral therapist and try to identify those barriers and then work on those barriers. And thank you, Farida. Your friend is a very good advocate in you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Farida. So, talking a little bit about more motivation, our viewer David has read that rigorous, intense exercise is best for Parkinson's. He mentioned that he participates in CrossFit 4 days a week, and curious about your thoughts on CrossFit and Parkinson's.
So I won't push any specific exercise program other than the ones that Parkinson's Foundation advocates for. I can tell you that the data suggests something very, so it's possible to exercise too much. So I used to give this talk and I had a patient who went home and exercised for, I kid you not, 9 hours a day and showed
Wow.
up a year later with joint pain. So Parkinson's patients can also have some compulsive, impulsive phenotypes. So it's important to be careful. Our data suggests that it's cardiovascular exercise, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So 150 minutes per week. There's not a clear benefit for doing anything more than that. And if you're going to do more than that, it's okay to enjoy exercise. You want to do things that are fun. So if CrossFit, I haven't done CrossFit, as you can tell, I'm not that buff, but people at CrossFit, they're buff and they have an incredible community. That's the most important part. They have a sense of shared purpose. And if you're getting 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, guess what? That's great. I hand out boxing, so we do a lot of Parkinson's boxing. And it's not because my Parkinson's patients are like Muhammad Ali. They're not hitting each other, but they have a community, they have a sense of purpose, and that is invaluable. And often those boxing relationships they're like lifelong friendships outside of boxing. So you have to get to cardiovascular exercise. Basically, I say you have to sweat. And I know some parts of this country you sweat just sitting around, but you have to set moving.
I like the sort of proprioception of feeling your heart move. That really offers an opportunity to notice that you're in cardio, that you're doing cardio. You can really feel your heart beating.
Yeah. And the other things are important. Like, so, yoga can be very important. I had a lot of yoga because there's a lot of rigidity involved. Tai Chi. There are other things that can be helpful. I don't want to downplay other exercises, but the cardiovascular piece is the one that we have the most data on.
Right. And what I heard you say, Dr. Narayanan, was what you will do, go do that. If that's CrossFit,
Yeah.
it's boxing. If it is yoga, go do that, but make sure you can feel that cardio. And Laura, if you would put in the chat our link to the Parkinson's exercise recommendations, it's a great resource if you're really looking to tailor your exercise movement to the recommendations of supporting Parkinson's disease. Um, let's move into medication. So Amy is asking if you could share a little bit more about antihistamines. Why do we avoid them? What does it do in Parkinson's if we do take an antihistamine?
Good question. So I told you that dopamine neurons are dysfunctional Parkinson's. These dopamine neurons they're small, but they control a lot of the brain. Cholinergic neurons are very similar. Those neurons are also small and they project all over the brain. So they have incredible energetic burden and they die almost as much as dopamine neurons. So uh, just to back up, neurons, they don't speak English, right? But they got to communicate. So they communicate by chemicals. So one of those chemicals is dopamine. Another one of those chemicals is this drug called acetylcholine. Now, very, very long name. I apologize. It's the oldest neurotransmitter, but that's how neurons communicate. We call neurons that have dopamine, dopamine neurons. We call neurons that have acetylcholine, cholinergic neurons. And these antihistamines act on those anticholinergic, they act on those cholinergic neurons, which is the reason why if you take Benadryl, you get sleepy. That's why. So, but the problem is if you have 10% of your cholinergic neurons left, you take an antihistamine, you can become very, very dysfunctional and your thinking can be off. And we've seen it quite commonly. So please stay away from anything with any cholinergic activity.
What could we use for sleep other
Ah,
than
Good question. So I do the behavioral things I talked about. There's a cognitive behavioral therapy, like why am I not sleeping? Is it racing thoughts? There's progressive relaxation. Then we move up to the medical therapies. I usually give melatonin to almost everyone now. I can't prescribe it to all of you out there. You talk about it with your doctor. Usually 3 mg, 1 to 3 mg is the ideal dose. Then we do a sleep study. Usually we do a sleep study in most Parkinson's patients, about 70 to 80% of Parkinson's patients have sleep problems. Some of them have sleep apnea. It might have nothing to do with Parkinson's disease and a CPAP mask can have. And then if you have this kind of acting out of your dreams, REM behavioral disorder, there's a medication, clonazepam, in ultra low doses, usually the lowest dose cut in half can be helpful. And in rare cases, we might do like other more powerful drugs like mirtazapine or trazodone. So there's an arsenal of things we could do for sleep, but it's important to think about. It's some patients we can't fix everything, but we can fix some things. And often, if I ask about sleep, I'm the first person that's asked about it.
Yeah, yeah. Room for just one more question, Dr. Narayanan. And since this is a Parkinson's Basics webinar, can you talk about the importance to taking your carbidopa, levodopa same time each day, what that routine looks like and its importance of it?
Absolutely. So first, the things I'm about to say, I don't want you to take it. I mean, you take it carefully, but it's not something to get stressed about. So do your best. That's the most important thing. Because I have patients taking 9, 10 times a day, and then like they can't take it regimen. And it's a symptomatic therapy. It does not slow the disease down, doesn't make it go faster, but it can make you feel better, fall less, and avoid things like infections, like pneumonia. So it's important to take if you're prescribed it. So I usually say 30 minutes before meals and not for 2 hours after because levodopa is a protein. So it's literally a protein. It comes from a bean, the Mucuna pruriens, which was discovered about 2,000 years ago on the west coast of India. But it's a protein. So if you have a bologna sandwich, you're not getting any of your levodopa. So take your levodopa at the. So I usually say first dose 3 times a day, 8, 11:30, 4:30. That's a half hour before meals. If you have to take it 4 times a day, then you got to be a little more creative. But I would try to get it away from meals, away from protein. And I would eat your protein, usually Mediterranean diet, chicken or fish, at the end of the day and avoid protein during the day. And I would put an alarm on your smartphone and I'd take it at the same time of day, carry a routine. Levodopa can go in a small packet. So often my patients carrying it with them and I take some with you in case you get stuck. If you need your levodopa, it's there for you.
There's so much more to learn about Parkinson's disease, Dr. Narayanan, and really appreciate you giving us this brief introduction and basic overview of Parkinson's for those of us who are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable to embrace what this diagnosis means for us and our loved ones. So appreciate the time that you've spent to share with our community today. Any final words that you'd like to share before I let you go?
Well, I'm gonna harp on the thing I said. The thing to do is not all these details. Forget it. think about right now, it's a beautiful day in January, hopefully wherever you are. How can you make today meaningful? How can you make today awesome? What can you do today? What conversations can you have? What experiences can you have? And what can you do to make today the very best? I think having that attitude on a day-to-day basis, my patients who do the best for the longest think that.
What can you do today? Appreciate that, Dr. Narayanan. All right, thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate your presence and for the questions. And I want to give a thank you to PD Health at Home's sponsor, Light of Day Foundation, whose generosity has made this programming possible. If we didn't get to your questions, I know that there were quite a few that we weren't able to get to. Please know that the Parkinson's Foundation is here to answer your questions. You can call our helpline at 1-800-4PD-INFO or email us at helpline@parkinson.org. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's always an honor to have shared this time with you and hope that you found the information and resources helpful on your journey. Until soon, my friends, be well.